Hey, what's up, White Oak? This is James, and welcome to another edition of Monday Morning Theology. So this past week, we talked about the book of Joshua, which is actually one of the most exciting books in the Old Testament. It has stories of heroism, story of strength, stories of courage, stories of faith, and it also talks about these amazing things that God did in and through the people of Israel. And so the main plot of the story is God is basically fulfilling his promise that he had made to give the people of Israel a homeland. If you remember from our talk about Genesis, God had promised a man named Abraham that he was going to make him into a great nation and that he was going to give that nation a homeland. Well, Joshua is basically the fulfillment of that promise. It's a really exciting book. But one of the problems that we see whenever we read Old Testament books, and I hear people say this from time to time, is it's hard to connect the stories that we read in the Old Testament to our own personal life. Like, it's really cool that God did these amazing things in Joshua, like he made city walls fall and he stopped the sun and all this kind of like crazy amazing things, but how does that really affect me this week, and how can I use that this week to help me love God more? But one thing we saw in the story is that this was a fulfillment of one of God's promises that he had made. And God did all these amazing things to ensure that that promise would come to pass. Well, I think that what we can draw from that is God always, 100% of the time, fulfills his promises. God fulfills his promises. If he fulfilled this promise to the people of Israel in this book of Joshua, he will fulfill all the promises that he makes throughout the Bible, and that's good news for us. And so I want to challenge you this week to read the Bible kind of in a different way, to use a different strategy in whatever passage that you're going to read this week. So what we see in the Bible a lot of times is most passages either deal with a promise that God is making or a fulfillment of a promise that God has already made. And so as you read your passage, I want you to think to yourself, is there a promise that God is making to the people of God in this passage, or is this a fulfillment of a promise that God had already made somewhere else in the Bible? I think as you do that, you're going to find that your strength, or that your faith is built up as you start learning to trust God more. And I just encourage you, the Christian walk is about faith. Like, God makes these promises, and we are called to trust in those promises and to walk by faith. And so it's not always the best thing to look at your circumstances and say, oh, God doesn't love me because X, Y, Z is happening in my life. It's like, no. We trust the promises of God, and the promises of God says that he loves us, that he has a plan for our lives, and that he sent Jesus Christ into the world to make us right with him. And so I encourage you this week to read your Bible and to read it in that way. I love you guys, and I hope to see you next week at White Oak.